Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the show. This is TFT Tinfoil Talk, and we're going to be talking about the lost tribes of Israel today. Very interesting little primer we're going to be having, and kind of setting up for a big conversation next week, talking about the Templars, which is another very interesting conversation. But this one here is there's a lot to talk about, so we'll be getting into that in a moment. But welcome everybody. Happy to have you in here, of course. Do keep in mind, check out all our links down below. And of course, hitting that subscribe button and like button, of course, is very helpful to us. There's also a little bell that Dinale keeps telling me about. So click that
Mhm.
as well. But really, we're live streamers. The thing that helps us out the most is hitting that share button and letting your family and friends and extended community know what's going on so they can come and join us. I see Booster Kiwi is hiding in the chat. Roger Heller is here as usual. Hello, Roger. Nice to see you, dude. Lady Celtic Moon, hello. Dennis Perak, Friends of Perkindo. Hi. All right. Awesome. But we're going to jump into the topic here momentarily. But of course, I want to come over and say hello to the panel. We are joined by George. Hi, George.
Hi, greetings. In light of this subject matter, I brought some brisk.
There you go. That's really good. I'm sure there'll be many, many of those kind of jokes coming today. I apologize ahead of time. And Booster is terrified that I'm going to do something inappropriate. I never do anything inappropriate, Booster. But gosh, guys, we're also joined by the Denali Lama. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Just came up from waking up from a nap and uh, looking forward to see what it's being said today. As always, this is educational and discussion purpose is just to have a simple discussion. There's no endorsement of any ideology or anything like that. So
Mhm.
YouTube, please don't shut us down because we are talking about this topic for any reason.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. Uh,
Yes.
Bianca fights zombies. Awesome. I hope Bianca is
Yeah.
badass. Better than that. What was that show? There was actually a movie, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was fun. And then they came out with
Mhm.
this horrible TV show, but it was very popular for a generation. I'm assuming that's probably your generation that liked that one, huh?
Oh yeah,
But
who wouldn't love to watch a bunch of kids fight zombies and monsters and ghouls and everything, and then when they're puzzled and they don't know what to do, they always go to a particular library that has all the answers. I mean, how
Sounds
did this library come together? I mean, who went to the trouble of writing all these books? Hey, a demon with three wings, two toes, and a jackhammer. Okay, let's look it up. Okay, this is how we're gonna defeat him. It's in this book.
where exactly did we go? It sounds like Scooby Doo, but no,
mm,
I never, I never got that show. The thing is, kind of funny to me was who is that the lead role there? What was that girl's name?
Sarah Michelle
sure.
Gellar.
Sarah
Yeah.
Michelle Gellar. Yeah, I mean she seemed nice enough, but she's kind of scrawny. And when she goes like going punching, it was kind of like eh. Maybe that was the comedy of it. Maybe that was the appeal. It was funny, a spoof, maybe. I don't know what it was, but it didn't look great. I did see a pretty good actiony lady though the other day. We watched Jurassic World. It was extremely dumbed down. It was, I mean, shockingly dumbed down movie. But she's not. I think if they work with her, she could probably be a fair action hero. She's got the body for it, I think. You guys see that movie?
The
Are you talking about the one with the dinosaurs get loose and they cause mayhem?
Yeah, it's not a good movie,
No.
dude. I know that. But I'm just saying that actress herself, she's not very memorable. She's got to work on that. But I think she could do action though, is what I'm saying. You
Okay,
know,
let me rephrase the question. Denelli, what
mhm,
dinosaur movie impressed you the most?
Jurassic Park.
the original was pretty good. Yeah,
Okay, there you go.
yeah. But anyway,
Mhm.
I was just mentioning her offhand. But let me see here. Holy cow, this is going to be good. I hope it is. We definitely have there's so many angles to go on this conversation. I don't really think we can cover it all, but we're going to try. Yowza Comics is in here. He says, "Yo, puppy power." Yeah, absolutely, man. I love the gang and Scooby Doo and all those guys. It was kind of funny the other day they did. They were doing Scooby Doo on the Pro Edition of Drawn and Quartered, and almost everybody did Velma. That was very very interesting choice.
Why not? Velma is the hottie.
She's not the hottie for without question. She's not actually.
What, you're saying Fred's the hottie? Oh, come on.
Absolutely, Fred's the hottie. Freddie Prince Jr. played him on the movie. I mean, come on, you don't get much more hottie than that.
Yeah, that's true.
He's a pretty boy. Bianca Feist the Zombie says, if it's top spicy for YouTube, post on BitChute. I post my less PC videos there. Oh no, I have no problem posting. Dinale's the one with the problem. P Money says, "Hey guys, I haven't spent enough time as I should. Just letting you know, I still appreciate all you guys do here. Oh, thanks a lot, dude. We're having a lot of fun. We've been doing it for a while, and we're still growing and still trying to put up interesting, different content. It's awesome." Yowza Comic says, "I did a weed smoking Shaggy. There you go. I used to have a shirt that there was a couple of them. My friend had the other one, but I had the Flintstones one that said Yabba Dabba Doobie. I used to wear that when I was a kid. Yeah, but that was the '80s, right?
I've never heard or seen that shirt before.
It's
Oh
funny,
man,
yeah.
that would have been awesome to have.
Yeah, it had Fred there with a big old joint in his hand, taking a puff. It was pretty cool. But anyway, now today we're talking about the lost tribes of Israel. So to get into that, I think I need to kind of add a primer to the primer. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, before I jump over and start sharing uh, some imagery and stuff, there's not a lot of imagery to share, actually. It's more of an open conversation, I think. But before I get into that, I think we need to lay out what it is exactly we're talking about. I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of exactly what we mean by the lost tribes of Israel, and I think a lot of people take different angles on it. Sometimes they get quite esoteric, actually. But simply put, in the year 724-ish BC, the Assyrians, for excuse me, a good decade before, hold on a second, a good decade before, they had basically been marching ever steadily west. Of course, Assyria is coming out of what we call Mesopotamia today. They were kind of a state that took over after Sumeria's fall, after the big cloud of death. So that's another conversation. But anyway, and they kept just conquering everything. They conquered Syria and Lebanon, of course, which those are interesting because those names have been around a long time, right? And they haven't changed. But of course, then they went into what we call the Holy Lands today. At that time, you had two kingdoms, really. They were split into two groups. In the north, you had Israel, and in the south, you had Judea, right? And of course, Judea was made up of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Right, and in the north it had all the other 10 tribes. They came in, they conquered them, they took the land, and they literally deported the entire population out. Now, a lot of people, I think, confuse the lost tribe moment with what happened a couple hundred years later and the fall of Judea and by the Babylonians attacking, which is a different group, Mesopotamian group, more to the north. And they ended up conquering and taking their leadership into captivity. Of course, the 30 years, everybody knows that story, before they returned, rebuilt the temple, and then several centuries later, many centuries later, the Romans came in 70 something AD because of the Jewish rebellion, and ended up putting that down and tearing down the old temple, burning it down, and taking the Ark of the Covenant with them. Some say. Anyway, so a lot of people confuse the two. So they
Right.
yeah, do keep in mind that the Hebrew, or Hyksos people have been conquered many, many times. But we're talking about an earlier one, and that's where the lost
Right.
tribes come from. So now the Assyrians, they did their thing, and they're not. They didn't murder the whole population, and they didn't separate the men and the women like, say, the Romans would do. right? Now the Romans, when they went into an area, they would always take a lot of slaves, and the men and women were separated and sold separately. But they'd also leave a lot of the population intact because mainly what they wanted was taxes. That was the Romans' main point. The Assyrians were more about control and regional control, and they literally removed populations. And this is where the 10 lost tribes come from. It's not all 12; it's just 10, right? And
Mhm.
now here's the thing. Let me come over and start showing some imagery now. Let me share here real quick.
Right. And while he's doing that, just to add, the only tribe that didn't have any land was the priests, the Levites.
The
They didn't have
Levi's,
any
well,
land.
the Jashers actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
The Cohens. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Mhm.
But let me see here. I need to come over and here we go. Okay. Well, yeah, let's do this one first.
Okay.
Let's try to find here. Yeah, let's do this one first. All right. So, am I doing this properly? Yes, I am. All right.
Hmm.
Very good. Now, here we go. Now, this is just looking at the 12 tribes themselves. We see, like I had said, we have up in the north, which was conquered by the Assyrians, all these different tribes. We get a little bit of genealogy here as far as the families, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Yeshua, and et cetera, et cetera. But the interesting thing about it is in the Bible itself, in the Torah, right? It talks about where in Kings particularly in the book of Kings is really where a lot of this information is, and it talks about where they went and where they were sent. Now, if I come over to the other side here, and I come up with this right here. Now, this is a slightly different thing. Let me go over here. Let me let me look for a map of
Hmm.
the Middle East. Here we go. Now, if you look at this map in here, let's find one that's a little wider. Yeah, this one's good. This will do right here. Perfect. All right. So let's take a look here. Now, this is, of course, a modern map, and a lot of these names still have remained the same, or some have changed. But if you look over here in what we call Iraq today, Assyria was basically a little bit more to the west of this. If you look where my pointer is in the Persian Gulf here, of course, this is where Sumer was, and then, of course, Assyria, Akkad, and Babylon up in the north, Baghdad, of course. But what happened was they were spread out. Some of them were brought into Iraq, and they were mainly used as teachers and militaries and stuff because they had skills, right? But a lot of them were kind of, exiled to the wastes, and a lot of these tribes ended up being pushed through Iran up into Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Western China. That's what the Torah says. It tells you exactly where they went. And of course, people over time have gone and looked, and there's little Jewish communities all over the place that claim reference to that. So they're actually not lost at all. They're exactly where the book says they are. Right. So why do we have the conversation of the lost tribes if they're not actually lost? They've just simply been, dispersed. And the question comes up is that one, it's prophecy. And when it comes to the Hebrew people, it's always about prophecy. Everything is about prophecy. I mean, the 6 million killed by fire was a prophecy that's been around for a long time, right? I'm not going to get into that, but everything they do is kind of based on prophecy. And one of the prophecies were that when the tribes returned to Israel, then the temple would rebuild, and then, of course, Har Megidon, or Armageddon, as we say in English, the battle would take place there, and therefore end times, right? This whole end times thing is not a Christian Jesus thing; it's a Jewish thing, actually. So there's a lot of interest in making prophecies come true. This is one of the things the Zionists do a lot. They really want prophecies to come true, and they do a lot of things to make that happen, right? So The question really is some of these areas, uh, they claim to be Jewish, but is this something that is ancestral, or is this something that over the past couple of centuries has been kind of insinuated upon them? Is really where the argument comes in. Now, me personally, I think if you go look at their culture and stuff, it's quite obvious that they did get pushed out here, and they do have remnants that survive, and therefore the conversation is over, right? But that's not a very good talk. But because they're really not lost. The lost tribes are not lost. We know exactly where they are. We even know where the priests are. They're over in Tunisia, the Cohen, because that's an important part of the prophecy as well. And we know exactly where they are. And it's kind of spooky, actually, if you go and look at it, how accurate the information is kind of lining up with the prophecy, because they're bringing a lot of these tribes back into Israel, actually. But how do we go from there? That's kind of the historical situation right now. There is no lost tribe. Well, the Jasher is kind of up in the air, but I think those are the Cohens of Tunisia, to be honest with you. But so
Well,
what do we talk about then? How do we go from here?
there's a big discussion with the Jewish priest
Mhm.
in Israel right now, where they're actually considering to do DNA testing to make sure that these tribes or these people are actually Jewish descent. So
Mhm.
there's still great debates whether they consider them Jewish or not, because they're not exhibiting the same Jewish traditions and rituals and stuff like that, which would make sense if you're pushed out and most of your culture is removed. We've seen it time and time again in
That's true.
history.
You got to get influence, but there is a pure Cohen group, though. Cohen means
Mhm.
priest in Hebrew, right? And
Right.
there is a pure Cohen group that lives in Tunisia, actually, on a little island, and they're very devout and they're very pure. I would say they're more pure priestly than the ones in Israel are. Actually, now that I'm sure is sacrilege, I just said, but they actually are, from an anthropological point of view. But anyway, my point being that the conversation basically can die right there, because there are no lost tribes. Done, finished. We know exactly where all of them are. They've been identified. I mean, we're talking about everything from if we go look at the Gad, the Manasseh, the of course. The Naphtali, Asher is a little bit. The Zebulon is a very big group,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. We know the Dan. They've been that's officially recognized a long time ago. Those are the Ethiopian Jews, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a mystery anymore. It's really, really not. But there are some very interesting conversations, because you have had priests looking for looking for the lost tribes for a very very long time, and a lot of Christians are interested in it too, right? Because it's something, it's about prophecy, it's connected to religion and stuff, so it's a very interesting topic. Now this one right here, I think I don't have any belief in it at all, and I'm going to explain why I don't. Because for me, this is my side of the presentation today. Actually, I'm just kind of giving you guys
Okay.
a introduction, but I'll just keep going and finish, and then let you guys interact with it. But
Sure.
uh, over the centuries, literally, they have been looking for these people, and you have priests and Christian groups that say, "Oh, we found them in the Americas, and we found them in Papua New Guinea and China, and da 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 da." You hear all of this stuff, and of course, in reality, they're just exactly where the Bible says they are. They're just kind of got kicked to the eastern side of Middle East, but some of these theories are very, very interesting. And this one particularly is interesting to me. Uh, this is the idea that the European peoples are the lost tribes. Okay. And what about the 13th tribe? Well, 13th tribe is dealing with basically two brothers and a woman, and they get kind of deep into the religious understanding of man and woman, the moon, and it's kind of complicated. We had someone who was going to come in and talk about that, but Uh, I don't. I'm not a big on that, but it's mainly just saying that there is, because all the tribes are supposed to be based upon the moon, and people say, oh, okay, well, there's 12 moons in a year. Well, that's not true. There's actually 13, and it's an interesting conversation, but I don't know enough about it to really go into it deeply, Bullet. I was kind of hoping someone would come in today to cover that because it's not my expertise. But this right here is very interesting, however. The fact that the European royals are all coming from the lost tribes. Now, um, and there's been a lot of work into that. You can go on YouTube and find some in-depth documentaries. People going crazy into house, crests, and I mean all kind of stuff. It's really interesting conversation, but of course, in the end, it's not accurate at all because
Um,
really, when you come down to it, if you look over here and you watch my mouse, over here in what we call modern day France, the Gallia, um, there were a group of people called the Scythians, right? And then up in Ireland and Britain, of course, there were more islands, but they've been reduced. But was another group, and a part of them was a priestly class. Okay, this is where the word Aryan comes from. The Aryans. Oh goodness gracious, the Nazis went and ruined that word, like those really nice mustaches that got ruined too. Oh well, but Aryan actually it wasn't talking about a specific race. It was talking about a priestly caste, is what it was. They were druids, right? And of course, they were also called the Shem Shu-Her, right? And these guys are the ones we know because it says in all the Egyptian or Cometian records and such that they're the ones who built Egypt, right? And they ended up kind of turning it over to a different group, which is what those kind of like northern Indian looking, nice, beautifully brown skinned, beautiful Egyptians. We don't see many of them anymore, but they are pretty people. But they got turned over from that. So we know that these Aryans, these priestly caste of the Emerald Islands, were actually very much involved in those early ancient time things that were going on. Not so much now, but to the south, there was a group of theirs that they kind of had like a civil war, and they got separated between the Isles of British Isles and, of course, Gallia, and they just really didn't get along. But these Gallians, these Scythians as they were called, they ended up migrating down into the Middle East, and they took everything as they went along, and they eventually came into Egypt, and of course that's when the deal was made, right? They would run the government, but the priests of Egypt, which of course are connected to the Shemshur or the Aryans, would run the temple. And for a long time, like a millennia, things went pretty well. And then, of course, we came to Akhenaten, who decided, nope, nope, I'm going to rule everything. I'm the big boss. And he caused a lot of trouble. He caused another civil war to kick off in Egypt. And even though it was a stalemate, when he left and he took all the Hyksos with him and ended up in what we call Israel today, they took all the wealth of Egypt and it never survived it. It didn't recover that. And of course, sometime later we had the Greeks come in and take it, and then the Romans, and of course later the Arabs and the Muslims. So Egypt was really destroyed at that moment. But it's a very important moment because the Hyksos, these Scythians that had come in, they are what become what we consider to be Hebrews. Now, therefore, so what it seems to be telling you is that the early Hebrew stories and 12 tribes, it's a European one, which seems odd. So there's a lot of interesting argument you can have with that and a conversation with it. But the thing that I'm trying to get to is by you saying that the 12 tribes or the 10 lost tribes or the peoples of Europe, it doesn't make any sense because they are the enemy, right? The Hyksos people are the enemy of the Europeans. They were violent, warlike people, and they're not our friends. Now you say, okay, they conquered and took over, but no, I'm not. I don't think that's accurate at all, because they were already existing. What you have, the people of Europe are coming from the Aryan temple areas and control and the culture. That's why the Celtic culture is so kind of unified across the whole area. The Hyksos themselves are something different, and they're always warlike, and they're always making trouble, and and throughout history, and this is why we see greater powers kind of constantly banging on them because of it's always about money. So from my point of view, the lost tribes are not lost. They're exactly where they're said to be, and this whole concept of the European, which is a big thing, but the whole idea of the Europeans being the lost tribes, it's nonsense. It's more than nonsense, it's ludicrous because they're literally the enemy, historically. So it doesn't make any sense at all. But this was the thing I wanted to cover on. Did you have any opinion on what I just said, George?
Okay, first, let me give you a very informed opinion.
Hmm.
Wow. Secondly, holy smokes. Third, mind blown. Fourth, what the hell are you talking about? Fifth, um, where am I? Who are you?
Thank you, George. Thank you. How about you, Denali? Did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think part of that uh, theories and hypothesis that most people are talking about is connected to when they say the Sun Grail, the Holy Grail.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that that's where it originated with, um, because they said that the blood would be found over there, and that's why a lot of people come there. And I'm suspecting one of the reasons why he brought in this specific theory is to exhibit why the Templars
Hmm.
were sent over to Jerusalem and the Promised Lands in those Crusades as well.
Of course, that is why I did
Uh,
that.
yeah,
And
mhm.
yeah, now I'm not going to cover it now. We're going to cover that next week. But
Yeah.
do keep in mind there is a big misnomer about the Crusades. They did end up fighting in the Middle East, and of course, the most famous Crusades is the one with Richard and Suleiman and all those kind of battles that they had. But the thing is, the misnomer is they didn't go to Israel actually. The first very place they marched and the very first place they went was Odessa. They didn't go to Jerusalem at all. It wasn't until much later. And of course, then you have to ask the question, what are they going to Odessa for? And then, well, that's a conversation for next week. But it
Mhm.
is connected and I think the connection we're going to have with the Templar will prove my point very clearly, actually, that the European peoples not only are not the lost tribes, it's insulting to say they are because literally the Hyksos people, which became what we call the Jews, right? Today, they are literally the enemy. I mean, historically, these days it's not, but in the ancient times they were the threat. And for you to say that they came back in and took everything and everything is under their rule, it's nonsense. We know that the royal houses of Europe are not coming from Europe. We do know they're from Babylon, but there's one thing. Now that's I get the point. But what you have to keep in mind is these this mix of the Scythians and the Aryan temple priests, because they were the ones that became kind of a lot of the kings and controllers. They were all over the place. The idea that people have that in ancient and it's anthropologists are really the problem because people have this image that just a few centuries ago people couldn't travel anywhere and no one went anywhere. It's nonsense. We know that in ancient times, like say 10,000 years ago, from checking teeth, teeth are wonderful, by the way, but we know that the diets of these people showed that they moved all over the place. They were traveled more then than we do in general now with all our technology. People were moving all over the place all the time. The Europeans were completely involved in what was going on in the Mediterranean. Of course they were. It's their southern ocean, right? The Indians are involved. The Chinese Silk Road, which everyone connects to Romans, that thing was set up thousands and thousands of years ago. Not only did the Cometians or the Egyptians have a connection with and trading with China, which I kind of illustrated with my story about where the unicorn comes from. We know that the Mesopotamians had trade routes as well. The whole world was moving and interacting. This is why when you get over to the Americas and people say Christopher Columbus discovered America? Well, rediscovered it maybe, but everyone was like, well, the Vikings were there first, and then you have no, it was Chinese. Well, we know the Romans were there. We have Roman mines up in Canada. Right? Those ancient peoples were moving all over the place all the time. The world was not isolated. It wasn't little teeny pockets of people that never saw any outsider. It's not the reality. That's not what the world was at all. So of course you had Europeans interacting with everything, and we have a lot of evidence that shows that the people who built a lot of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt were actually Europeans, right? And of course they got pushed out because of whatever reasons, right? And that's a long conversation. But my point being is the having Europeans involved with what was going on in the Middle East or Africa is a normal thing. You can't take the idea that a lot of people have that things were isolated and there was no interaction, no movement. It's not true. It's not true at all. And
especially during the time of the conquerors. You would have warlords and groups of people going way far away from their territory. If I
yeah,
remember right, the Philistines in the Old Testament were actually one of the progenitors of the Greeks.
oh sure.
Like they were very European.
And we know that the Philistines were actually, of course, directly involved in our modern alphabet and therefore our language. But they were also up trading in Britain, right? We
Yeah,
know this, and that's a
yeah.
long
I
time
mean,
ago.
anybody with a bit of ambition, maybe even a little bit more ambition than their actual means.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean they would make contact all over the place.
They did. We also have evidence that these Phoenicians that traveled even as far as the New World. So I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, it's an
yeah.
important point. Welcome, Benedict. Nice to have you here. I've been trying to carry the load here for today. We had a couple other people who were supposed to come in who are very specialized in this that didn't come in, but I'm doing my best, man. So can I take a breath now? Would you like to take it?
I don't know where I would take it from. I mean, I know that the as far as the main bulk of the 10 tribes were, that they were kind of the people who lived in the Samaria and the I believe
Sure.
it was the northern kingdom for a while after the civil war, and they split after the reign of Solomon.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, they according to the Bible anyway, they were conquered and pretty much traded off as slaves to
Hmm.
just about every nation under heaven. So, um, it kind of makes me curious when I hear about tribes in like Southeast Asia and Africa that have the tradition of like circumcision, of course, amongst a bunch of other ones, but specifically they have that tradition,
Hmm.
which is kind of circumcision is, as far as I know, is mainly practiced by um, Semitic tribes like the Israelites and the uh, Ishmaelites and everything, mainly Middle Eastern tribes. But you find way down in Africa, all the way in Southeast Asia, you find these tribes that also practice it
Hmm.
today. And it kind of makes you wonder if maybe they're the very, very distant descendants of these dispersed tribes.
Okay, absolutely, and I understand the arguments and the interest, especially if you take into account that circumcision is a relatively modern introduction to the Israel. A lot of people think that that's from thousands and thousands of years BC, but it's not. It was actually during the Babylonian occupation, which was several centuries after the topic we're talking about right now. It was the Babylonian attack was well after the Assyrian attack conquering, and it was
Yeah,
during
yeah.
their.
Babylon was the kingdom that ended up kind of possessing Judah for a long time
That's right.
before they reinstated themselves as a nation.
That's right. But
And
Yeah, but circumcision was brought in during that enslavement by Babylon, and it was brought in as a self punishment because they couldn't believe that their God had let them get defeated, and therefore they started circumcising themselves to as a punishment or as an apology to God. That's where circumcision is coming from, and the fact that it has spread to so many other places is very interesting, and I think it
Well,
just shows the
actually, well, the thing is that according to the Bible, Abraham was actually from I believe, from that area
he
of
was.
Babylon, or maybe a little bit farther east. And so it's actually very possible that they again, kind of, maybe that tradition um, originated in Babylon or something. But I honestly think it was probably around longer, because you find it in like you find it in like texts that were actually written before the being possessed by Babylon. And you can even tell by like the language, and like some of the people that they mention and stuff, like in Kings and in Chronicles. If I remember right, Chronicles looks like it was compiled, quite a ways afterwards. But if you look in Samuel and Kings, just the way that the languages and everything, it's actually quite a bit older. And honestly, I think that the circumcision was probably that they were probably practicing it a ways before Babylon,
Well,
before they were actually
it
possessed by Babylon.
Yeah, it might well be true. And of course, that brings up another conversation, right? Because officially it's Babylon, but you make good points. But I think what we need to understand, and which I was kind of introducing with the Hyksos a little bit, I didn't want to get too deep into it, but I think we need to understand that what we consider to be the Hebrews today are not exactly what you think they are. And it kind of goes in line with the thinking of the culture itself, but I'm not going to get into that. But because you talk about Abraham. Abraham's father was a Sumerian priest, right? Not Assyrian, not Akkadian. He was Sumerian. That's how far back we're going, right? He was his family was a Sumerian. They were Sumerian priest, and he followed in that. When he went to Egypt, when he was sent to Egypt to interact, he was welcomed. It wasn't like just some sheep herder from nowhere just kind of walking into Egypt and saying, "Give me army, give me an army." It wasn't like that. He was connected because the priest class were connected all the way across that entire culture. They are not separated, and this is the thing people don't seem to want to talk about. You had the two brothers and the sister, right? From the ancient stories, right? And it doesn't matter whatever culture you're in, they change their names a little bit, but it's the same stories. And
I
one
never heard
brother,
about this sister.
I'll get to it in a second. But the one brother, of course, was in charge of Africa, and he built the great cities of Kem, the Egyptian cities. You had the other brother who was in charge of Mesopotamia and the Sumer, and of course the sister was like in the story, she's kind of whining to her father because the father ruled in heaven, of course, and she said, "Father, you've given my brothers land and control. Why can't I have something?" He said, "Fine." So he gave her the land to the east, which of course is the Indus Valley, which gives us India. Her name was Ninhursag, and of course today she was also known as the Great Cow or the Old Cow, and that was a respectful term. And then this is directly related to why the Indians don't eat cows is because of her, right? So you have this family. And all the stories we have, whether it be the Greek ones about Zeus or what have you, they're all connected. The same stories being told over and over and over again, just kind of with a little bit of cultural flavor put on top of it. Even over here in Asia, the Chinese stories, the Korean stories, the Japanese stories, etc., they're the same stories, right? So if we just take it aside and take all the supernatural aspects away from it and say, okay, there must have been some progenitor group that these stories are coming from. And this gives us an interesting look into it because when you talk about things like circumcision and such, maybe a lot of these cultural things that we see spread across that are attached to the Hebrews or other groups, maybe it was just simply things coming out of the temple priests of the ancient Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and Indus Valley people because they were all connected. So maybe your point is very valid.
Okay.
Did I take a long time to get to that point? I apologize.
Not really. I mean, I kind of understand. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
That, because there's so many similarities between certain stories that
Mhm.
they gather that they're all from the same culture, which is very very interesting.
It is, and I think it's more even more interesting because when I was a student in university, of course, everything was Egypt. Mesopotamia was becoming more and more interesting. There was a lot of study going on. That's the kind of the direction I went. But later, these past decade has been a very interesting one because we found out that the oldest stuff we have on Earth is not coming out of Egypt. It's not coming out of Mesopotamia, and arguably, I think we might find some stuff in the Americas that are pretty old too. But interestingly enough, the oldest stuff we have is coming out of Ireland. I didn't expect that, not at all. But then if you go read the old stories, it makes a lot of sense, and I think this is the problem. People, anthropologists, archaeologists, they hate stories. They don't want to listen to the mythologies or the stories of the people. They just can't stand it, right? But the old stories are very clear. They tell us very clearly that the people after the great disaster, the flood, right? The people who came out and brought light back to the world, and that's how they put it, were coming out of the British Isles. And somehow they must have survived something intact with whatever technology was that they had. Now, I'm not talking space aliens. I'm talking like Roman, Egyptian level technology.
I guess that's a kind of different version of the story than what I grew up with. But
Well, right, it is though. And that's the shocking thing. It is different, but and you would just think to dismiss it. But now that we know archaeologically that actually the Irish stuff is the oldest stuff, now you have to go back and rethink it, right?
how do they date? How do they date it?
They've been there's been a lot of temples uncovered in Ireland, particularly, and there's been a lot of translations of the old stories, and they found that everything is connected, but they're older. Now, I know a lot of people are going to get in, and George, of course, would jump in with this with carbon dating. I don't care for it much myself. I agree, but it's simply the oldest temples we have just by location and those kind of techniques they have. The
So are they
archaeological
judging
group.
it? Are they judging it by like the type of literature that they find there, or the
Uh,
type of pottery that they find there?
yep,
Or
pottery, literature, temple building, ruins, all of those kind of things. Like I said, it's shocking to me because that's not how I was trained and educated. But it changes everything, and I think we're going to find even older cultures. Who knows exactly? Like for instance, the oldest story of Noah for a long time here. Most of my life, the oldest version of Noah is, of course, coming out of the tale of Gilgamesh, which is the Sumerian story. But actually, the story of Nuada and he's of course another. It's just another name for Noah. That is
wasn't
the
it from
oldest Noah
the
story we have.
Elba or Ebla stone or Ebla? I forget what that was. It was like a monument or something that had all this writing all over it.
Yes, yes, that's right.
And
And
wasn't that like kind of northeastern like Eurasian area? Or
well,
I'm
no,
actually trying to
we
figure out.
had the Ural Mountains discoveries, and there's been a lot. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Russia. Actually, it's very fascinating. Actually, they have a Stonehenge in Russia in the Ural Mountains that's much larger than Stonehenge, right? The one in Britain. But yes, they had that one, but they've what's changed their minds is we've had similar stones been discovered in Ireland, and they have the same story. They're just older, right? Older versions and therefore more detailed versions.
I would ask how they know that they're older.
Yeah, no, I understand the argument. I get it. But they use their standard techniques and stuff. And for me, looking at the stories and dissecting the Irish story of the flood and the mid Asian one with the Ural Mountains, and then of course the Mesopotamian one, and then the Egyptian one, and the Indian one, and then of course the latter, Jewish one, right? Looking at every version of it, the interesting thing is, the older the version, the more detailed the story. And the story of Nuada traveling during the flood and all that stuff is the most detailed story we have, right? Yeah. Now I understand people really really hate carbon dating, and like I said, I don't like it much either. But there is also a sedimentation type of a dating you can do, which once again, I understand that sedimentation can be put up overnight, literally with flooding. Uh, so there's a lot of questions. This isn't saying that it's automatic, but the academic world doesn't like to take leaps, right? They hate it. But in this past 10 years, we've seen two things happen academically, and I think it's very important. One, they accept that there was a worldwide flood and a cataclysm. It's accepted now. And if you know anything about anthropology or archaeology, you know that they have been fighting that for centuries, dude. I mean, ever since the inception of archaeology, they've been fighting that concept because it comes out of that Darwinistic science and you got to stand against the church and all that kind of nonsense. But it's accepted now because the evidence has been piled up by some really good work. And the fact that the academics are accepting that the oldest stuff we have right now is coming out of Ireland, it says a lot. It says volumes, dude. And like I said, I didn't expect this at all. It's not what I would have thought, but it's very telling that it is because I think what it seems happened was uh, there was a great disaster. Things were thrown. Not all humans were killed. It's not like that, but it was really bad. And the planet was rocked, and it just almost killed everything. It was really bad cataclysm that happened about 12,000 years ago, and it seems that there was a group that was up in the northern part. Now we could get into the fact that the poles shift and the equator is at a different position. We can get into all that, but that's not today's topic. But somehow this group up there survived with some semblance of their understanding intact. And as time went by, they migrated little by little. And things started coming back because there was a few thousand years of darkness there where nothing was going on, and this of course is called the Neolithic. But it's not it shouldn't be called the Neolithic. It should be called the Retrolithic, I think, because people were thrown into it. It wasn't that they were coming up from something, and that's what the evidence is starting to show. We had great culture before. We got knocked down, and we've been coming back ever since. Is what seems to be the case. And somehow they ended up building, and all the people who had gone wild around them started being lifted up by them as they started moving over just naturally over thousands of years and building and doing things. And eventually, the peoples of those areas ended up taking over completely. Now, whether this was by right or by violence, is probably by violence, I would assume, has brought us to the populations we have today. I think this is probably close to the truth. And you ask, well, what does this have to do with the lost tribes of Israel? Well, I think it's very important because it shows us that the Sumerian, the Mesopotamian culture, which all this is being built around it, because the Jews are Mesopotamians, is what they are. Um, it's not a singular culture. It was many peoples. So when you have certain arguments coming in that, because okay, this is what a Jew looks like, but I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think there were many people that were part of that culture, and they all look very different. So when you get into this, arguments of where are the 12 tribes, Papua New Guinea, and all this stuff like
Well,
that.
if you're talking about specifically the 12 tribes of Israel, that's the 12 tribes that descended from specifically Jacob. There were actually many cultures recorded biblically who descended from Abraham, but Jacob is several generations down,
Yeah,
and
but
so
I don't
and
I
so
don't believe that at all, dude.
and so you have Ish. Well, I mean, the people around there claim it too. I mean, the Muslims claim to be descendants of Ishmael,
Sure,
and then you have and then you have
conveniently.
and then you have Esau and all that. And so, I mean, well, when you think about like whatever the disaster may have been, um, shortly after that, families do split. Like any family that splits off does actually end up becoming different nations because they all are descended from them. And so, I don't know.
No, I get your point, and but me personally, I don't think all the tribes, air quoting here, of Israel are actually from Abraham. I don't believe that at all.
So
I don't.
what do you call the tribes of Israel then?
I
What makes
think
them?
I
Because
think yeah,
Israel was literally the name of Jacob. So when you're saying tribes of Israel, you're saying tribes of Jacob.
yeah, well, do understand that this whole the Israel thing is kind of a very modern take, right? We did have Israel and we did have Judea, true, but they didn't call themselves Israelites, right? They called themselves the Hyksos or the Hebrew by that time, probably. But they this so let's not confuse the two, and that's something I had made a comment in the beginning. I think there's a lot of confusion because we've had centuries of these Jewish priests going around the world looking for the tribes, and they've had a lot of influence. And I think they've actually insinuated the Jewishism upon these kind of little lost groups that are barely hanging on. I think there's many evidence of that, but that's a not necessarily an important conversation. But what I believe is that these Hyksos people came out of Egypt, and when they left with all different kinds of people. Because this is the thing about Egypt, it's extremely cosmopolitan. It's not one group or another. There were Arabs and Nubians and Persians and the European peoples and Indians and even Chinese, right? It was extremely cosmopolitan. And when they left up out of there and went up and ended up establishing themselves up in what today is Jerusalem, um, they became what we call the Jews today. I'm just saying that I don't think they're all from Abraham, dude. I think there are many different racial groups actually.
Ah,
Did I
okay.
make was that clear? I don't know. That's what I
So they're
think.
not really. So you're saying that they're not really appropriately called the 10 tribes of Israel.
No, no. I would say they're just the disparate breaking down of the Hyksos empire that had built up, and they had a good run, but they ended up getting the split up. And I feel that all those people of that area, through various waves of up and down, I mean, cultures raising and falling, nations falling and rising, all of that kind of plays into the entire narrative, right? Now, having a specific group, particularly the ones that came out of Europe that came out recently and calling themselves Jews, because they were practicing Jews, but calling themselves racially Jews, and then, of course, Israel being reestablished and all that kind of stuff, there's a really solid argument that they're not actually the traditional tribe of Judah at all, even though they call themselves that, right? Judeans, right? The Jews. And of course, we could get into the conversation a little bit about the Medici and how that the whole Jew word came back anyway. But I just don't think I understand their desire for everything to be racially connected and a continuity in Abraham, and I get that. But when you look at the simple fact of the shepherd kings, for instance, right? Everyone has this image of Moses and Abraham and just walking around with a bunch of sheep. These were high end, elite people within the cultures. Abraham was not a shepherd, he was an elite general temple priest guy. He was serious.
Who owned sheep herds.
He might well have, but he's
He
not the
delegated it
image.
to servants because he was extremely wealthy, but yeah,
Mm.
he owned sheep herds.
But you understand what I'm saying. The people have the image, all these Bible movies we see. They always show them as
Yeah,
being these very lowly
they
and
have the
humble.
image of like basically a hobo
Yeah,
with a bunch of.
exactly. And that's the Christian thing because Christians believe the meek shall inherit the earth, and actually some of those ideas coming out of the Christians is great actually. It's one of the nice charitable facts about Christians, but Abraham was not this thing you have an image in your head. He was a high-end elite diplomat and politician and et cetera, et cetera. And he had a lot of influence, sure. But I just think that you have to look at the what we call the Jews today as being actually the Mesopotamians, and that is not a singular racial group. That is a very diverse group, right?
Hmm.
I know that's
So,
sacrilege, but
well, I know, but like what I'm saying is like, how long have they been carrying on that sham.
A long time, dude. A long time. Because you have to think about it this way as well. Babylonians who came in and took Jerusalem, right? They actually are the same people, right? Because when the Hyksos marched north, 4,000, nearly 5,000 years ago, and took the region, they took everything. The Greeks are actually coming out of the Hyksos. The Assyrians and the Babylonians are coming out of the Hyksos. It's all incestuous, dude. They're all actually the same people. They just over time became splintered politically, and they ended up going to wars like cousins, like the Europeans. The Europeans is completely incestuous. All the royals are all related, right? And the ruling parties of all those groups, well, not necessarily the makeup of the people, but the ruling groups were absolutely coming from the same royal families which came out of Egypt, right? Because it didn't start that way, but the kind of remigration, retaking of the Middle East was coming out of the Hyksos. So when you say the Babylonians took Jerusalem, well, it was, cousin Bob came over and attacked cousin John, right? Is really what it comes down to. You know what I mean? They're not separated like that. They're the same culture. And if you guys over here in the chat that want me to talk about the Anunnaki, which I kind of touched on, and the Rothschilds and stuff like that, well, we know that the ruling families, not the people of Europe, the ruling families of Europe, all come out of. We can trace their lineage all the way back to Babylon. Yeah, that's true. It is true. Yeah. So therefore, the Rothschilds are. But I think the Rothschilds are actually probably connected directly connected to probably Akhenaten if you go back and look at it, or at least maybe they took the power of Akhenaten. Because one of the reasons why there's so much, because you have to ask the question, why are they so rich? Why is there so much control? Are they just simply smarter? Maybe. But we know that when the Hyksos left Egypt. Now that Exodus story is a really nice little story, but the older versions of it don't work out like that. Moses wasn't. He was not this little lowly prince that escaped. He was king Moses, and civil war popped off, which he was responsible for, completely responsible for, because of his machinations. And even though there was a stalemate, when he left, they took all the gold because he had access to it. And I think that gold has been building up Middle East, Babylon, into Europe for all of those millennia, and it just makes you
So
wonder how
what's
much
your
gold did they leave with, dude.
so what are your sources for that? For them being the Hisks, whatever they're called.
Oh, lots, dude. Tons of stuff. It would take me a long time to simply. I mean, I'm not writing a book here. I'd have to go and put references and everything together. But no, this is well documented. It's well documented. And now I am kind of striding because it's a weird thing to stride here, right? Because I'm striding the fence between the academic understanding and the religious concept, right? The writings and the mythologies and the academic what's academically accepted. So I understand that I'm striding those two fences here, but we're just having fun. But no, the evidence and understanding of the Hyksos, the Scythian people who came down from what we call Gallia, all that's documented, very well documented. Now, the interesting thing is it took a long time for all those disparate studies to be brought together. Because one of the problems we have with scientists in general is they have to specialize. It's all about money, right? They have to specialize if they want to find a career and make a living. And when they become specialized, they become very myopic. You know what I mean? They can't see the other things that are around them because they're focused on the little teeny point. And you need occasionally someone who comes along that takes all the little points and drags them together and shows how they're connected. And that happens every now and then, right? It's
You know,
rare.
like with the guy who was saying that Jesus was selling essential oils and mushrooms,
Maybe
or that
not
he
not
was.
like that. Yeah.
They're pretty unclear on it, or that he was a mushroom. But
Maybe, possibly. Yeah. No, I
he, he,
understand the
he
whole ayahuasca
also
argument.
compiled
I get it.
he
Yeah.
also compiled a lot of data from different cultures, and because the older because the Hebrew name for Jesus being Hoshea sounds similar to the name of some mushroom in the area, and so
Hmm.
he put all this stuff together to say that Jesus was a mushroom.
Sure, but then again, there is information in here that he's presenting that I think is useful. The idea that tribal peoples used drugs to connect to their god, I think, is very poignant, actually. Now, maybe he went too far with it, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking strictly academic, and I understand that some people don't like the academics because they're so rigid, but I'm talking about when an academic comes along or an academic group, and they actually try to take a broad view and take all the little detailed information and bring it together into a general concept. And this is the past 10 years has been going on, and it's giving us a really great. This is like a very exciting time to be involved with archaeology and anthropology, actually. And because of this, we're starting to get a much better view of what the world was. Instead of it being just Egyptology, and we still have a problem with that. The Egyptologists they hate when anyone talks about anything other than Egypt. They'll make lawsuits. They're really very troublesome. But it's starting to break away from it.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. So I understand my view is, especially if you're a Christian or something like that, it may not be a happy one. But I'm just looking at it from an anthropological point of view, and I think it's very fascinating. Like I said, my focus was Mesopotamia, and I'm finding that my ideas were wrong. And what I was taught was wrong, and it's starting to be shifted. And like I said in the beginning, even though right now seem to be focusing on Ireland a lot, I think in the end, we're starting to see evidence come out of the Americas that I think they might even be older, dude. I think we might be seeing some very interesting stuff come out of Central and South America, maybe even North America in the coming decades. I think it might shift again. Yeah, no, I agree
That's
with that Model 3. Yeah.
uh, possibly Central America because they actually had an established culture, but Northern America, I mean, I mean, there were a couple of legitimate nations, but just because of how underdeveloped they were, it really seems like they had probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is ignorant speaking, but it seems like they're from like they're descendants from a big nomadic group that came through and they settled those areas just because they're so like they lack a lot of, I guess, what you would expect from a long established civilization.
Hmm. No, no,
And
no.
then
I
I know
agree.
that if you go down to South America, you actually have like these really complicated cultures that were studying astronomy and and we're very highly developed.
Hmm. Well,
But
there's a reason for that, though. And it's actually part of the academic acceptance of the flood, because we know the evidence that was brought out in the North America, as far as the flooding ripples and all those things, where we're talking like mountain-sized ripples, right? This is where the concept of the giant ice glacier sitting over the northwest of America, where of course that's where the North Pole was at that time. We know that most everything that was in what we call Canada, America was wiped out. So whatever was there before, and we know the Clovis people were there. We know that, and they were primitive, but those were European peoples, right? But that all got wiped out, and then of course we had the migrations that came in later, which has given us the red man of North America, the Native American. But Central America and South America would not have been touched as heavily by that, and that's why I think we're seeing more evidence. There are some little disparate pieces that are found in North America that shows that there was some stuff going on there. So who knows what they'll discover? But yeah, North America was wiped out, dude. It was completely wiped out.
hmm,
Yeah. Yeah, Nazca Plains, super underdeveloped. It's interesting, isn't it, though? The Nazca Plains are really neat. Although the things I say about Nazca that people that misunderstand is like the only way you can see it is from the air. It must have been airplanes, and maybe. But actually, now you can stand on the side by mountains and see them very clearly. Now that doesn't mean they weren't developed for something else, but Nazca is interesting. Elongated skulls for the win. Yeah, no, that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? I wouldn't mind doing that one. That's going to take a little bit of time to create a presentation, though, I think. Christ is another name for light. Interesting. Some people would argue that all the things of Christ and Lucifer and all that stuff is coming out of Abaddon anyway. But that's the great thing about these conversations. You can go so many directions, and because no one knows anything. When a scientist says this is this, don't believe them because they don't know it's that at all. Bianca Fights the Zombie says, aren't most modern Jews 99% European by now? Yeah, well, the argument is they're European, period. Actually, they're not the actual tribe of Judea at all. And
So what at what point in European history were they starting to be ostracized as Christ killers?
Well, of course, that would come in, with the Christians, but I would assume that started with Constantine, but and the separation. But
Pretty darn early.
it is very early. But I think there's a lot of information we don't have. Like for instance,
So
yeah, go ahead.
so what's the theory on the group of people who lived there, who lived in Israel during the Roman Empire, who had all the rebellions and the Maccabees and everything?
Uh-huh.
Were they the actual tribe of Judah?
I would say so, and Benjamin.
I mean,
Yeah.
as far as like your current studies show. So like what um do you know any like historical sources on what happened after they were um because that's kind of a great I don't really know a whole lot about that area of time after the time of Christ. I know that Jerusalem was pretty much sacked because they tried to hold a rebellion there. um
Well, they did, and of course the Romans
but
came
like
in. Yeah.
I was curious about what happened to the people afterwards, like were they actually dispersed or
Not really. There was some dispersion, of course. Obviously, there's war, and it always causes things to move around. But no, they weren't. And Here's really a very interesting little point. Um, we know that, and this is there once again. There's some incestuous activity going on here because you would think that the Islam and the Christians and the Jews would be extremely separated at war all the time, but we have a lot of evidence that shows they actually work together and were friendly often. The thing with when it comes, I'm not. It's a long conversation, but let me just say this: more than likely, the people in the area, which we call Palestinians, are probably the actual Jews.
ah
Yeah, because this group that calls themselves Judea today, they actually were a kind of Slavic group that had a kingdom. They got their butt kicked left and right a lot, and their king adopted Judaism. He adopted it, right? And made them all Jews. And of course, then centuries and centuries passed, and it brought us to the modern time. So they're not born Jew. They are converted Jew, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They are not the tribe of Judea. All the evidence that you have around that shows that they are not the Judeans. They're most certainly not, but yet
hmm.
they call themselves that today. So if when we have problems, because when Rome fell and we went in, we call it the Dark Ages. It's not like there wasn't stuff going on. It's not like the world stopped, but information stopped. So we lose a lot of time, and then of course there's another problem where Western people, scientists and stuff, they're very in a way racist because they don't want to really think about or talk about the non-Western peoples, and therefore there's a lot of information that gets lost or is not assimilated into the overall concept. But there was a lot of lost time, and of course, coming to the Middle Ages, that was a very ignorant time as well, as far as the movement of information. The Christian Church had a lot to do with that. But As time passed, however, I can't guarantee it because with the Islamic invasions and conquering and all the wars that they brought with them, which were a lot, and of course all the slavery and all that other kind of stuff, it really muddies the information. But I would say that if I were going to put money on it, I would say that the Palestinians are some form of Jew. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can see this a little bit in the ones in Pakistan and Afghanistan as well. They're Muslims, right? But if you look at the like Sharia law, for instance, now Sharia law is very set up. It's very Arabic. It's coming out of the Arabic laws and stuff like that. But if you look at the Pakistanis and the Palestinians and stuff, they don't follow Sharia as tightly as say Saudi Arabia or Iran does, right? And they actually have their own kind of little law system that they stack on top of it. And here's the interesting thing: those little laws that they live their life by, and of course they make sure they don't get killed by breaking Sharia law, but their actual laws that are not Sharia are Jewish. And it's old school Jewish too. I mean, eye for an eye. I mean, seriously, eye for an eye. No playing around, right? And
Well, actually, what's interesting is that like eye for an eye and like Old Testament speaking was actually talking about when a like when they do something to a pregnant woman that causes her to give birth prematurely. Basically, what the baby like any damage to the baby they do to the person who hurt the woman.
mhm.
And so that's what it's talking about when saying eye for eye, tooth for tooth,
Oh well,
like
sure,
that.
yeah.
The specific law.
Yeah, and if you go back to Mesopotamia, you see it's much more nuanced, it's much more sophisticated and modern, really. But today, the followers, like I said, the people of Afghanistan, the Pakistani people, the Palestinians, they don't understand that, right? For them, an eye for an eye. It's quite literal, right? So whatever the truth may be, wherever it may be coming from, they practice it literally, right? And the Muslims don't, right? This is the thing that's interesting about the Muslims. Their Sharia law, which I don't want Sharia law, but their Sharia law is far more nuanced and sophisticated than the Jewish law. It is. At least modern interpretations of Jewish law, what's being
Yeah, because
observed.
it's kind of an honor. It's kind of more honor based than law.
Yeah,
Than like
yeah, but it
law.
also common sense comes into it too, right?
Yeah.
Like for instance, in Sharia, if you have something like, say, I don't know, what's a big one? Adultery. All right. And if someone is accused of that, there's a court hearing, and and you might say it leans more toward the male, and it does. And this is one of those things that's unfortunate for the Europeans. Once again, why I make the argument against the missing lost tribes being European at all, because the Europeans, men and women, actually work together quite balanced in a very balanced way. Their rule was very simple: you do what you do best for the community. It didn't matter what gender you were, right? This whole idea of men, women, and the stricture is coming out of these desert cultures, right? But if you look at adultery in Islam, there's a lot of court hearings and arguments that will be made, and it's not. It can be, you can get out of it, right? But if you go to these, especially the ones in Afghanistan and Pakistan, who are they have the actual Jewish law is what they're following, not the Sharia, for them, it's like nope, even the hint or accusation of it is enough to kill them both, which is very old school Torah rule, right? At least they're what they perceive it to be.
There was actually supposed to be a court proceeding,
I know
and
that,
then
but I'm saying they perceive it that way, and they do it. It's uneducated approach, really. And I just called hundreds of millions of people uneducated. I do apologize, but you know what I'm saying?
kind of
Yeah. So it's not. Yeah. I don't want to bang it to death. Hey, DeWolf, what's up, man? DeWolf is here, but he's not going to talk to me. I understand.
I am. I am going to talk to you. Yeah. Well, you guys are what's going on, and I'm just way late getting into the party.
Oh, that's okay. We just been having a chat, and I probably should just get rid of this right here. But I've been doing my best to cover as much as I can. Benedict's come in and been quite helpful. Thank you very much, dude. But now I'm sure you have an opinion on this. I don't have much more time because I do need to leave. But take the floor, sir. Go ahead.
You mean on the aspect of the 13 tribes of Israel?
Yeah.
Okay, I was able to catch a little bit about what you were talking about. I think that it included some of the Arab theories. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
Like the Turkish kind of moving in.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
It does, which of course isn't surprising that you would take that slant.
Huh.
But there's several different ways that people start counting up to get 13 tribes, because there's the original 12 sons, and then they just throw in Levi as the priests, and then so there some people count them as a tribe,
Mhm.
making 13.
The Ephraim and Manasseh were both half tribes because they're both sons of Joseph, who is one of the 12 patriarchs, or one of the 12. And so both Ephraim and Manasseh would be half tribes of the tribe of Joseph.
Right, and then that's the other part there too. And so you get into that. That was kind of my next point as well. So it's great that you guys have already covered it. So there's a lot of weird theories, or counting ways, right? And people will either say that those are each a full tribe and not half tribes, which, of course, you also have the John Smith. Is that correct? The Church of Latter-day Saints, and they believe that one of the tribes, the 13th tribe, left the area and then just migrated their way around the world until they got into the Americas, and that the New Jerusalem was the Americas, established by all of the peoples there, creating, of course, the
Mm.
civilization that they would eventually believe lead them to the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, we didn't even cover that, huh? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but being that you guys covered that, that was really my big thing right there, was the 13 tribes, much like other conspiracy theories and questions. What is that Mandela effect? It's
Yeah.
people's perceptions and things that happened in which trying to come up with reasons for things where you count 13 versus 12, and
Mhm.
in one of these regards you could almost get to 14 if you tried hard enough.
Yes, well, Booster brings it up. He says, Chester, can you tell me about the 14th missing tribe, the Mountain Jew, and why it sounds kind of like Mountain Dew, and how it is linked to video game related mass shootings? I couldn't tell you anything about that, Booster. Not even a little bit.
Maybe
No,
really, I'm not sure about mass shootings.
yeah, I'm not sure either. But now I'm just curious. I don't really know, but maybe when you guys can explain this to me. I the Levi, the Cohen, the priest, um, aren't they somehow connected to the Jasher though?
The Jasher,
Yeah, the tribe of Jasher.
Jasher.
Because I thought they were connected to the tribe of Jasher, the priestly caste. The Levites.
It's possible that one of the families within the tribe of Levi were Jasherites. Um, uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, because they had the sons of they had the Korah, sons of Korah, sons of Aaron,
Hmm.
and so they had several houses, like families within the tribe, and maybe Jasher was one of them. I don't remember.
Oh, I'm just
Um,
curious because, like we talk about over in Tunisia, there's a whole island of Levites, Cohens, and I know that there has been a lot of there's a large group of priests in Jerusalem that are really trying to connect all the dots on the lost tribes, and they have identified 11 of the 12. Well, of course, 9 of the 10 lost tribes. But the only one they haven't located is the Jasher, and they don't know how to quantify the Cohen in Tunisia. And I'm kind of wondering if that may well be the Jasher. You know what I mean? I'm just speculating. I have no clue. But
so, are you sure there's actually a tribe of Jasher, or are you talking about the book of Jasher?
no, I'm talking about the tribe. Yeah,
Where's
Jasherites.
the tribe mentioned? Like
Well, let me go find what I had up here earlier. All right, so who do we have here? We have Edom, Moab, Judah, Benjamin, Dan, Ephraim, Gad, Reuben, Manasseh, Naphtali, and Asher, and Zebulon.
Oh, Asher. Okay.
Yeah, Asher. Yeah.
Asher. Yeah, that's one of the tribes. Edom is listed as a tribe of Israel.
Oh no, it's just showing the area. Sorry, it's not one of the tribes. No, I was just kind
Oh, okay.
of just reading them off.
No,
It's just the
Edom,
area
I mean,
next to it.
Edom was of the same family line, but
Mm-hmm.
not of the actual 12 tribes of Israel.
Well, I was
Or
making the argument that they're all related, actually. But no, Asher is one of the 12 tribes. Yeah.
yeah.
Did I mispronounce it or something?
No, well, yeah, I thought you said Jasher with like a J.
Oh
Yeah.
no, maybe I did. Maybe I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. No, as far as I know, Asher is actually a completely different tribe. You have Levi, and then you have Asher.
Oh, so that was my
And,
mistake. Yeah, sorry about that.
that's fine.
I have been riding by the seat of my pants here for the past hour. You know,
Good
Yeah,
job. Yeah.
I
yeah.
don't know
Well,
about that.
A
and
lot of information.
one of the aspects that you have to remember is in the text, though, it always talks about the 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Mm,
So in other areas, it's always referenced as 12, 12 tribes, 12 tribes, 12 tribes.
right.
And so the fact that there's this aspect of 13 all is the thing always that brings up mystery, right?
Well, I also had heard. Like I said, I'm really out of my depth with this conversation, but I have heard that one of the reasons why the Jewish, priests, the rabbis, kind of keep on the 13 is because of the fact that, of course, the Jewish people, as many ancient people, they work on a lunar calendar, not a solar one. And it says that the tribes of Israel were counted as that of the year of the moon or something like that. Uh,
Oh yes.
yeah, yeah, and seeing as the fact that there, well, technically are 13 moons in a year, um, that's where the 13th tribe is kind of coming out of the necessity for there to needs to be one. You guys have any opinion on that?
I I don't know. Maybe that's in the Talmud or something.
Mm.
Um, most of my knowledge is Old and New Testament. So
That's
Uh,
true though.
yeah.
You because every full moon is a month, and every month then is represented by the setting and rising of the moon at that point. As
Mhm.
far as the Jewish calendar goes, right?
Yeah,
That's why Easter always changes days.
that's right.
So and wow, the fact that there's 13. I mean, maybe it's another one of those half right issues, right? Because we have 12 months, and I thought there was really just 12 moons in a year,
Well,
but I think
there's
even
a,
counting
there's
it's a portion. There's a portion left over.
Well, there is, and it's like a few days, right? But therefore, with the leap year, every so often they add a month, right? For it's not a perfect 13 months, but it's like 4 days short or something like that.
Right.
how many years? Like, do you know how? So is it like every 4 years that they add a month, or every? Oh no, that would be. I think that's the 50th year, the year of Jubilee.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it may be. Yeah, I'm not sure what
So,
it is, but I do know that they do that to account for it because a month, a lunar calendar is 28 days, right? So but I just had heard that. I don't
Right.
know anything about it. I just had heard that this is kind of a rabbi take on it, and therefore they needs to be a 13th tribe, and therefore they get in talking about this daughter and her husband and the two sons and
well, there was actually there was actually as far as the only according to the scriptures anyway, they did have one daughter. Jacob did have one daughter among those sons,
mhm.
and I don't know if that's significant in this case at all, but
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
why I didn't want to touch the 13 tribe thing, 'cause I don't really know enough about it to get into it. But anyway, I would love to sit here and talk for another hour and go who knows where. But I hope we were at least somewhat lucent in the conversation. It is such a broad thing, and like with Denali, excuse me, not Denali, but DeWolf came in and made a perfect point about the Jews in America, because we know they were there. They most certainly were. But then again, we know the Romans were there. We know the Egyptians were there. There's a lot of information about who was running around the Americas.
And
Uh,
as far as the time when Hebrews that actually identified as Hebrews would have visited there,
mhm,
um, biblically during Solomon's reign, I mean they were kind of Jerusalem was like, or Israel was kind of like
mhm.
a trade hub, and it's very possible that they you know maybe attempted to put down a colony over there or explored it at some point. I mean, they may have even had some kingdom that lasted, like a decade or two over
Yeah,
there.
maybe. Yeah.
But
But then again, getting into the conversation of Solomon, we talk about where is Solomon's temple, where is the city of Solomon, and of course the mines of Solomon as well, where a lot of people always want to, especially the modern day Jews in Israel, everything has to be, Israel. All Israel all the time, but then again, there's a fair argument that Solomon was not a displaced king, but he was just one of the Hyksos kings, one of the dragon lords, therefore Egyptian, right? And if
okay,
Oh yeah.
that's true, well, then that changes the conversation completely, doesn't it? And it makes a lot of sense too when you talk about because if you read a lot of stories of Solomon, especially some of the Jewish stuff, which Christians don't read at all, which is unfortunate, because a lot of those stories about Solomon are some of the most fun stuff in the Bible. I mean, he fights demons, he chains demons, and it's really cool. You should go find the Jewish writings on Solomon. He's a lot of fun. But
what's that book called?
I don't remember offhand, but I remember reading it a long time ago. Of course, in English.
Sounds
But
almost sounds almost Catholic.
no, no, I think it's Jewish. I'm pretty sure it's Jewish. It could be Catholic. I don't think so though. I'm pretty sure it's Jewish. But anyway, that's a different conversation what we're talking about. But just mentioning Solomon, he's a pretty interesting historical figure actually. And of course, I
Hmm.
think he is real. I do believe that it was a real king. I know that some people, particularly in the archaeological world, kind of argue that Solomon wasn't real at all. I don't think that's true. I think there's more than enough evidence to show that he was a real king.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I just think he was an Egyptian king or a Cometian king, you know.
Yep.
Okay.
But anyway, fun conversation. This is one that could go. There's so many other angles we could have taken. We didn't, but I do need to run. But next week we are going to be talking about the Templar Knights, and of course today was kind of a primer for that because a lot of the things we talked about today are going to lead into next week's conversation for sure. Particularly from me. That's why I mentioned the very a lot of people believe the theory that the 10 tribes are the Europeans. I don't agree at all. But
I don't see any evidence for
no,
that.
not at all.
Never heard any
Yeah,
evidence for that. That sounds more like some kind of Aryan like right of kingship
maybe, maybe,
scheme.
yeah. And once again, you were using the poor Aryans. They were good people, and they've been damned by the damned Germans. But anyway, but yeah, I agree
Didn't
100%,
the
dude.
guys claim that they're descendants from Jesus?
Oh, they probably did. I'm sure. Yeah. Anything that makes them look better, right?
Well,
Uh,
well, yeah. I don't know. You don't ever confuse Dan Brown with what's going on in the
oh no,
you know.
goodness gracious. And is that going to come up next week? Are we going to get into Yeshua and Isis again?
Well, no, unless it does come up. But even without going down that conversation again,
Hmm.
Dan Brown had such a great influence on the Templars that it's hard to get away from it.
It's
Though
true.
I hope to dispel much of that and break the Templars down into a more basic form
Yeah.
and find out who they really are.
Yeah, no, I think I hope so. We can't avoid the fact that the Templars went to Odessa first, not Jerusalem. That has to be part of the conversation, and it has to be, and we have to understand why, right?
I heard, didn't they? Weren't they like like an exchange, like a money exchange service?
Well, Odessa?
I mean,
No, no, no.
no, the Templars. The Templars. They like they would take notes saying, basically saying that, this person exchanged this amount of money, this amount worth of gold up in Europe, and so they would just take that note down and they would exchange it for gold down in places along the Mediterranean.
Well,
Um,
We'll get
I
into that next week.
yeah, we'll get into that next
okay.
week. And I think you're talking. My conversation is about the initial Crusades, and you're getting into later times. But anyway, we will
Well, that's
talk
the
about that.
conspiracy stuff.
It
That's the
is
conspiracy
conspiracy.
stuff.
You're right. It
Yeah.
is. But we're going to get into that. But today was a really good day to leading into that conversation. I do apologize we couldn't cover every little angle on it because we could go another 3 hours really talking about all the different concepts and conspiracy theories, but we don't have that time. But I do appreciate you guys coming in. It was a lot of fun having these kind of conversations. I do hope I tried to keep myself online. It was so difficult. I was kind of juggling three balls at the same time. Well, whatever. We're just here to have fun on TFT. And Denali, you're still here.
Yes.
I see. Denali, take us out of here. But I want to thank Benedict and George and, of course, DeWolf for coming in and joining us. And, of course, all of you guys for being here for the conversation. And really nice to have you here, Benedict. Nice conversation, dude.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, no problem. Go ahead, Denali.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for TFT. Join us tomorrow at 9 p.m. for Comics News Today. And all our shows for the upcoming week, which we have Bugs Bear Basement on Tuesday. We'll be just doing a general chat there. Wednesday is our regular Comics News Today at 8 p.m., followed by the Pro Edition of Drawn and Quarter at Black Loose Universe at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thursday, we have 8 p.m. Comics News Today, followed by our very own Drawn and Quarter Fan Edition at 10 p.m. Eastern. Fridays are our off day, and we come back Saturday for Fan Speak. But as always, your perception shapes your reality, so always make it a good one.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Gesundheit.
Later, guys.
Aloha.
All right.